Wow, well, here we are in round two, and we didn't get to interview anyone else in round one because they decided to go to time, and would you believe it, first to finish again is Wagz.
Yep, I played against another mono-red deck. This one went to 3 games, but it wasn't exactly mono-red. He was splashing, well, I saw a Marsh Flats game 1, and then a Godless Shrine came off of it. I thought this was a bit strange, but he didn't show me any white or black spells. Now I suspected Bump in the Night and possibly Boros Charm, but I thought I'd ask him to make sure, and he confirmed that was the case before we went to game 2, so I was able to sideboard a bit differently to how I might have otherwise. But yeah, it burnt me out game 2, being on the play. It was, got me one turn before I could land an Obstinate Baloth, gain a bit of that life back. I'd rather have Kitchen Finks in all honesty, but there's just no room and you have to pick your style. So yeah, burnt out before I could survive, and then game 3 was just the other way around. I got the pressure down and he mulliganed, and I stripped away his first bit with an Inquisition of Kozilek, so didn't get anything going really.
So, talking about these deck decisions then, do you think that's the first maybe sort of slight change you would consider to your deck?
Well, it's one of the considerations of Jund is which... You have the Deathrite, Dark Confidant, Tarmogoyf trio are pretty fixed, and then you have kind of a 3-drop slot and a 4-drop slot. So 3 drops tend to be occupied by like Liliana the Veil, Lingering Souls, Kitchen Finks, sometimes Geralf's Messenger. Your 4-drop used to be Bloodbraid, but now it's some people are going Aristocrat like myself, some people are going a mixture of Huntmaster, Olivia, Thrun, Obstinate Baloth. There's a bunch of different cards which are all near the same power level, but you have to pick your poison. So it's really what you're expecting to face and what you feel more comfortable playing with.
So let's talk about this mana curve and how you pick how many of each of the lands you have based on this mana curve, and specifically, certainly in Jund decks in the past, you always say wanted like your black mana early on, and then a bit later on you'd have the green coming out. So it's like, how do you actually pick sort of a correct mana base for these sort of decks?
You go online and you copy what someone successful has done. But in all honesty, but Jund, if you look at it, the core of it's a black-green deck. You've got Deathrite Shaman could be either, but you've got like Bob and Goyf and Liliana, and you discard spells. So really you're a black-green deck that's splashing Lightning Bolt. You don't really, I don't think, want to go to any double red spells. So these Molten Rains in the sideboard, I think it's a powerful card, and I think it complements the strategy, but I don't think the mana base is comfortable supporting it. So I have Fire Spouts. I considered Slagstorm, which has a similar effect, but I just didn't want to be paying that mana cost. The 1 red mana cost on Slagstorm wasn't the same as the 2 and a red mana cost on Fire Spout for me, even though it had the option of hitting players. So,
and that's mainly because you're not going to be doing it turn 3 as well.
Slagstorm you're definitely not going to be doing turn 3. You're never going to get 2 red lands out by then, because especially if I'm playing Lingering Souls, I need to have a white land coming out, and the deck doesn't have a Sacred Foundry. The reason it has Godless Shrine, the black-white, and it has Temple Garden, the green-white. And the reason for that is that you often want to fetch... You have all these black and green fetches, and you need to fetch red mana off of them to cast some things earlier on. So if you're doing that, you're going to have either a red-green land or a red-black land. Now, the complementary land to have all 4 of your colours off of 2 lands is going to be your Temple Garden or your Godless Shrine. You're very seldom going to have this overgrown tomb that you're putting so much stock in to want to have a Sacred Foundry to complement it to get all your 4 colours off of 2 lands. Yeah. And a Sacred Foundry doesn't help you cast some of these more multicoloured spells like Abrupt Decay and Liliana of the Veil. So it interferes in your casting of your spells. So that's why you go for those 2 white lands. But you don't need to get them until turn 3, turn 4 really. So the white's not as important quickly. You need to get your black and your green and then your red first.
Now, is there anything you would do differently against a burn deck? So let's plan out these first 5 turns of Jund against burn. What are you going to do differently to any other matchup?
Well, what I did do in that match was I made a Blackleaf Cliffs on turn 1, which comes into play untapped, and I used it to cast my Inquisition of Kozilek. Now in my hand, I had a Stomping Ground and an Overgrown Tomb. Either one of these I could pay 2 life to have them untapped, and I could have made my Tarmogoyf on turn 2. Although it would have been out of his range of burn spells to kill it, it wasn't that big. It would have only been a 2-3. It would become a 3-4 had he tried to burn it, and so it would have survived. But 2 isn't the greatest of attacking power that early. So I played my second land tapped in order to avoid paying this 2 life, because I really didn't want to effectively give him free cards. He'd mulliganed. If I pay 2 life, I'm drawing him a card and casting it for him. I don't want to do that.
Now, funnily enough, you actually mentioned the thing about the 2-3. It's funny because over in PTQ back in Liverpool, Rich Hagan actually fell for this one. He didn't realise that the 2-3 became a 3-4. Damage goes onto the monster, but as a state-based effect, it doesn't check until the full resolution of the spell, at which point it's a 3-4.
Yeah, it's not an obvious interaction. If you know the rules, it makes perfect sense, but it's one of those things that the rules have been set up to make things work, and they try to be intuitive where they can, but you can't realistically cover everything, so there has to be some things which seem funny to some people, and there will be corner cases like that catch you out. Luckily, that's the sort of thing that's going to come up often enough that a lot of people will be aware of it.
Would you, if you deliberately knew you were against a bad player, would you ever try to, if you knew they had a lightning bolt, would you try and bait them with a 2-3 Tarmogoyf?
Yeah, every time, but I'm never gonna try and catch them out with it. I mean, although it's a bad player, they still could win. You have to respect every opponent, and try and trick them, get them with it, and then you educate them, and they can not make it next time.
So going back to these first 5 turns, then, what are we looking at after this turn 2 drop then?
I don't really remember. I think turn 3 was playing of the Overgrown Tomb tapped and then making of the Tarmogoyf. So again, not paying my life, conserving my life total, but starting to apply pressure. I actually didn't have too many defensive spells, but such as Lightning Bolt to kill his own creatures, or Abrupt Decay if he had anything funny like Blood Moon, which is less likely if he's got the 3-color deck, but you never know. Although I didn't have those, I didn't need to pay the life to start getting on board to race him, and I was happier representing the option of having these things in my hand so that he might play differently.
So, you're happy with how things have gone, but you've just played burn decks, and we don't have a whole lot to talk about on that front.
No real interaction. It's just about getting onto the board and getting your opponent's life down as quickly as possible. It's seat your pants stuff. I mean, I effectively survived on 1 life because they had the option of Boros charming me when I was on 5, but had to use it on something else. So, I mean, it's just the way it happens. But not greatly interactive as yet.
And in your metagaming you did before the tournament, did you really expect these sort of red decks to be around in the format?
No, I certainly didn't expect to face 2 of them, possibly 1. You have to respect that it exists. I mean, I did toy with Kitchen Finks, but again, it's a double green cast spell, and if I'm playing 4 colours, I realistically would prefer to only have 1 of each that I'm relying on having. I mean, you're always going to end up with 2 of a colour, but you don't know which it's going to be, so you shouldn't rely on any one double-coloured thing.
Would you consider it maybe a tier 3 deck?
Yeah, so I don't...
Let's talk about the tiers, in fact. What do we consider to be each tier right at this moment? As far as... This is your metagaming thought process.
Okay, well, by tier 1, I more understand to be what people are likely to show up with, not necessarily what are automatically the good decks, because there's certainly been times when lots of people have shown up with a deck that I don't think is very good.
It's really important to actually get definitions of what we consider to be tiers. I have a slightly different definition, which is what I expect to be in the top 8 of PTQs.
Okay.
So what do I expect? Tier 1 for me are decks that can actually win the PTQ. Tier 2 are decks that maybe a little bit roguish, could do with a bit of surprise value. In tier 3 decks are the decks you're going to be playing against, and you have to fight your way through them to make it to a top 8, but maybe you're not going to meet him in a semi-final or a final.
Okay, well, we'll stick to your definition so as we're on the same page. I would expect blue-white based control decks using, I don't know, Snapcaster Mage, maybe Restoration Angel, this sort of thing. They possibly splash red. There's a bit of variety in there, but I expect the core of that to be a tier 1 style deck. Junda, similarly, I expect there's a lot of different flavors, like I've got my own, there are others, but the core of that deck I expect to be a tier 1 deck. I think also various flavors of Tron, so there are the red-green Tron decks, but there's also a mono-blue version that's been coming into play recently that uses Treasure Mage to tutor up its Wormcallers and its Mindslavers. That's been, I've seen a few about, people seem to be liking playing it. After that, I don't know, Modern's fairly wide open, there's a bunch of different things, nothing's really, there's a bunch of decks that could win a PTQ and could, will possibly top 8, but won't do so reliably because they're just underplayed or it's not their day.
Yeah, I mean, we saw robots back in Liverpool make it all the way to the final, which everyone always packs 15 cards full of sideboard against artifacts, and yet here was Affinity, now called robots, in the final.
Yep, it's just one of those decks. It has those draws, and artifact destruction, it is reactive, it does cost sometimes more mana than the things you're trying to kill, and so sometimes it can be a bit slow. Maybe you don't draw it, maybe just the robots player has ways of evading it, like the Etch champions that just can't be targeted by a lot of by the spot artifact destruction spells have to be get rid of by more like Wrath of God style effects. So yeah, maybe it just doesn't interact in the right way, and Affinity continues to beat people.
Now obviously I've been a poker player for the last 15 years, and one thing that's really important for poker players is tilt, or at least keeping your mind in a really positive frame. How do Magic players, you know, I tend to find they wear their heart on their sleeve, right?
Yeah, people get a lot of emotional attachment to their decks. Because you put a lot of time and effort into picking out the cards. You have to collect the cards together, sleeve them up. You know, you spend a lot of time with your deck before you even set foot in a tournament room. So yeah, people have a big emotional attachment to their decks, and they don't like to lose because they feel it's a reflection of themselves. I used to be like that myself. I get my days where I just can't buy a win, and sometimes it's annoying. Sometimes you have to shrug it off and go, "That's okay, whatever. I'm gonna go to bed."
Now let's talk about pet decks, which is another problem a lot of Magic players seem to have, is that they have their favourite deck, and no matter how much you try and tell them that it's really not a good choice to take, they insist on playing it. So,
yeah, some people just enjoy various types of interactions, and they like the decks. A lot of it sometimes is to do with card availability. People will only have the cards for one deck, especially in eternal formats like Legacy, where you just can't really buy into another deck very quickly. You can trade into it or buy into it slowly, but you're going to stick with the deck you have. So I only have what are they even called, Tundras, blue-white lands. So I'm only going to play blue-white in Legacy because I don't really have the option unless I'm borrowing 100 cards off somebody. And I do that from time to time, you know. But I prefer to play blue-white because I can use the cards. It's more convenient. I don't have to mess anyone around, and so it's easier to stick with a deck that I know and that I have.
So we've got Ben over here. Maybe Ben wants to join us here, tell us how he's doing. So this is one of the other guys we're going to be following all throughout the day. And this is obviously our first time talking to you now. So what are you playing?
I'm playing Kiki Pod.
Do you think this was a good choice?
I think it's a good choice for me because I haven't played Modern at all. So the idea was that if I don't know the format, I just play a deck that has all the answers. So that's what I've gone with, and I'm currently 2-0.
So, Wagz, you're having a bit of a laugh at this. Do you think it's a good choice today?
Yeah, I forgot about it. I do think it's tier 1, but I think I tried practicing this deck for the Liverpool PTQ, which I didn't end up playing in, but I struggled because I didn't know the deck. So I would say without preparation, I would struggle to remember my list and remember what I have access to. But that might be my style and my memory rather than because I'm not used to that sort of deck. If Ben has had a lot of practice, then maybe he has a different approach.
Yeah. So why Kiki Pod and not Malera Pod?
I just like the oops I win. It's also with Malera Pod, I think more often than not you need the pod to win, or you need Call of Calling. Whereas with Kiki Pod, you don't necessarily need it. Like I've won 3 of the 4 games I've won today. I haven't used pod.
Okay. So round 1, how did it go for you? What was the?
I had Infect, and game 1 I comboed out, and then in game 2 I played Chalice of the Void 4-1.
And that kills his deck completely. Now, let's talk briefly about your game 2 then, but particularly about the interactions of the pod deck here, and what are the actual ways you can be winning?
There's about 10 different situations. For example, in my game 1, I had a 1-drop and a 2-drop in the pod, and he just said go, and I assume Infect has no removal, although it did show me Dismember in game 2. But you just go from the 2-drop into Seaver Exarch and tap pod, pod the 1-drop, get Phantasmal Image, untap pod, pod the Phantasmal Image, get Restoration Angel, untap pod the Angel, get Kiki win. Yep. That's how it works.
So it's not a good choice then for someone who's not up to date on their interactions in Magic.
No, but round two, I admit to getting a bit lucky because I forgot that Aven Mind Sensor was a thing, even though there's one of them in my own deck. But then in game 2, I had Kiki out, and Kiki's not just a combo finisher. You can also just really helps you with your blocking phase. I stayed alive because I had Kiki out, and I just needed to rip one of my 4 ofs. I had 6 turns to do it because he seemed to just be drawing creatures and not removal. And at the last possible moment, obviously, I drew Deceiver Exarch, so I got lucky in game 2.
Now, one of the issues we had briefly with the deck, because we did do a lot of testing with it, was that very often you just have to raw dog the pod, right? I mean, is there any other ways now of being able to do it? Can you search for it at all?
I don't have any ways of searching for the pod, but I do have 2 Chord of Calling. Lee Parker actually built the deck, and so far I haven't used Call of Calling once because I haven't got the mana there. Yeah, go ahead, Wagz.
If you're worried about the mana, you could play Fabricate and search for either Pod or Spellskate.
It's not my deck, man.
So, you know, we're actually going to be having a chat with Lee at some point today. Do you think he's sort of the brains behind all the decks that you end up playing?
No, he's not. Ross still cooking us. Yeah, I'm wearing the shirt today. I've managed to wear the shirt. I usually play whatever Ross tells me to play. However, I completely forgot about this PTQ till Thursday, and by the time I said, Ross, can you lend me a deck? Ross said, no, unless you want to play Affinity, and I was like, no. Lee, that Kiki Pod list we were talking about like 2 weeks ago, do you have it? And he said, I've got like 65 of it, so I had to scrounge for cards at the last minute.
Now, why don't you want to play Affinity? I mean, we obviously know why, but why do you not like to play Affinity?
Two reasons. One, I think it's very glass cannon-y right now, and the other is everyone seems to be packing hate for Affinity. You know, I'm packing lots of hate myself.
I mean, you certainly found this, Rob, that Affinity tends to get all the backlash from all the hate from all the other decks. Like, every deck, if you sideboard anything in, you just go, oh, this also happens to be really good against Affinity.
Yeah, any cheap removal like Lightning Bolt, although they're probably main deck, but any cheap removal, any cheap artifact destruction, even stuff in as innocuous as Pithing Needle to stop your Steel Overseer, or the equipping on the Cranial Plating, or just Stony Silence. These random things that you do want for particular other decks because they're that powerful there, you just happen to have 5 or 6 of them against Affinity without noticing.
So Ben, what we want you to do for the rest of the day is, as you're playing through, think about all the cards that are in your Kiki Pod deck, and think about any changes you might be making throughout the day and sort of your thought processes behind this kind of thing. We've just had time called on the round, which means you've probably got about another, well, I don't know. I mean, if we've got Jack still playing his Eggs deck, we've probably got another 15 minutes before they're going to wrap up.
Just playing Control. We're going to be here for another half an hour, so...
So good luck to both of you guys anyway, and we'll pick you all up hopefully at the end of the next round, unless, you know, you're running to time if you are up against Jack, and
we'll see. Hopefully I'll play this one too.
But 2-0 for both of you right now.
Yep.
Good luck.